Hey, well, good afternoon. Thanks for coming along to our first session for 2023, and first session in a new building. So congratulations on making it over here. For those that might not know, I'm Jamie McKenzie, the chair of the SA chapter of the ACRS. Just a bit of housekeeping, particularly as it is a new building. The toilets, if you need them, pretend you're back at the lifts, turn right down a little corridor. You'll find them out there. The session is being broadcast via a webinar, and that's being recorded. So if you have a desire to watch it again, you can, or pass it on to other people. Please go for it. And for those of you that are online, please do use the Q&A function if you have any questions, and we can pass those on and get them answered. Just a little bit of update on ACRS. SA chapter recently met. We are hoping to put on a number of sessions this year. We've got a few ideas, and we're also looking at some other types of events that we might be able to put on, such as field trips. So that will hopefully be exciting. So please keep an eye out for that. After a very successful event in New Zealand last year, the annual Australasian Road Safety Conference this year will be held in Cairns. The call for abstracts is open now and closes, I think, at the end of March. So if you're inclined to do that kind of thing, please get those in soon. It's going to be a hybrid conference again, so get on over there if you can, but otherwise please just join virtually. Okay, so with that, I'll introduce our speaker for today. So Andy has been in the ambulance industry since 1991 and is a registered paramedic with the Australian Health Practitioner Regulatory Agency, AHPRA. He's worked for the SA Ambulance Service since 2000, and previous to that worked for 9 years in a UK ambulance service. He's currently the Manager Operational Driving with responsibility across the state for SA Ambulance Driver Training, investigating and reviewing driving-related matters, and development of policy procedures and driver training programs. In 2017, he was awarded the Ambulance Service Medal in the Australia Day Honours in recognition of his contribution to road safety within SAAS. In 2021, he helped create the Collaboration for Ambulance Driver Development Australasia in an effort to develop safe standards and increase cross-communication in the emergency driving industry. So I'll hand over to Andy while I get his presentation set up.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone.
Start from the beginning, hey. Wheels.
All right, thank you. I'll just put my link down here, no doubt. I'll get it. Hey, so good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me here. Let's just get into it. Let's just start with recognition of country. So I acknowledge the land that we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and recognise their continuing connection to the land, their spirituality, history and culture. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Right, so I thought we'd start off with a bit of a snapshot of SAAS so you can see what our organisation is like and what it is we're doing. So then that builds into sort of how many vehicles we're doing, what sort of training we're doing, stuff like that. Throughout most of these slides, I'm using data of 21-22 financial year. So it's not the most up-to-date current one. And as you may know, we're having a massive intake at the moment. So, numbers are climbing up pretty quick, new stations being built, more vehicles. So these figures are just a little bit older. So we have over 2,700 staff all up, and that's certainly going to go over to 3,000 by the end of this year. At the moment, I split around about 1,500 is volunteer workforce. And they're people that are obviously giving their time up in some very remote and rural areas to provide ambulance service. And then we have around about 1,200 career ambulance staff, and they're all operating all from about over 100 stations. And we have career stations in all major centres. So, Port Augusta, Lincoln, Mount Gambier, we've got career paid stations there, and everywhere in between is basically supported by a volunteer network that do some amazing work for us. So we have a big cohort of people, and that gives us some complexity when it comes down to training and how we deliver that training to them. We have got generally on a daily basis over 300 active fleets on the road. They cover over 13.8 million kilometres every year. And we have everything from cycles to heavy trucks, and sort of everything in between. We've got specialist ambulances that deal with bariatric patients. We've got solo responders. We've got dual general purpose ambulances. So quite a big range of vehicles that we use as well. And the image on the screen that you can see there is from one of our AVL screens that I can go to. So every red dot on there is a vehicle that's been dispatched to an emergency case at that moment in time. So there's a lot of work going on all the time. And this obviously little cluster we have in the middle there is, we could expand on that and see what's going on in Metro, which again is probably as much as what's going on around the rest of the state. But there's a lot of work going on most of the time. So our current workload, again, averaging figures, is we answer 743 000 calls every day. And then on top of that, there's 211 non-emergency calls. So they have calls that may be coming from hospitals wanting people to be discharged, or from clinics that need somebody, maybe taking off to a clinic, but it's not an emergency job. So that's like call volume that's going on. And then that leads to us responding to about 877 incidents per day and transporting over 700 people. Now, that transport is not necessarily to hospital. We've now, over the past couple of years, developed a lot of areas where we can take people to primary care centres or alternate pathways, which is trying to ease the burden on the emergency systems in hospitals, because everywhere is obviously very overloaded. But at the end of the day, if you call 000, you're one of, 877 people that will be asking for an ambulance. And you can understand why then people get frustrated when there's not one on their doorstep, that quick, because we're still dealing with other ones. So there's a lot of workload to deal with. Now, as I say, not all the calls that come in, even 000 calls, result in us going initially lights and sirens. They're triaged at the point of call, and we decide on determinants as to what they're going to, what response we're going to go to. Quite often we might dispatch a crew. We hear somebody that's, they're not responsive, they're collapsed or whatever. That would come out priority 2 type thing. We'd send an ambulance, lights and sirens sort of straight away to that. But then during questioning, that the call takers are doing, you then find that it's not quite as bad as what they initially thought it was. We've got some more advice. So we can tell the crews even en route to downgrade and just drive routinely and normally to a scene. And that's why sometimes, you see an ambulance driving down the road, lights and sirens, they go through an intersection, and then all of a sudden they turn everything off. It's not just because we wanted to get through the intersection, it's the fact that the job may have been downgraded or cancelled, or they might be being diverted to another job or something along those lines. Also got to consider that, to run a full cardiac arrest nowadays, we do everything out of hospital that they could do in a hospital. So we might need a team of 5 or 6 people at that scene. Now, we use bystanders to do a little bit, but obviously bystanders are often our relatives, and it all becomes very emotional at the scene. But it might mean that we have to send 3 vehicles to a scene or 2 ambulances to a scene. So sometimes you'll get multiple responses going to a job. You might see an ambulance go through, and then another car goes through, and you think, what the hell are they doing? They're just playing, but maybe we need extra resources. The other thing that happens is a general paramedic crew can get to a scene, and there may be a clinical need for them to have some higher level care. And we have intensive care paramedics, we have extended care paramedics, we've got doctors from MedStar, so we can call in that additional bit of support if we need it. So again, there might be multiple vehicles going to a scene at various stages. So in 21-22, we've done about 182,500 dispatches, emergency dispatches from our call centre. So I believe about every 1.6 minutes, we're dispatching a vehicle out on an emergency case. Now, let's get to some of the driver training that we do with these people. So we've got an in-house program that we call DRIVE. You see, Defensive and Response Vehicle Education. We're all for acronyms in SAAS. There's lots of them. So we've been running this for around about the last 7 years. And how do we get to DRIVE? About 15 years ago, our driving course was all about the mindset, nothing but the mindset. It was really pure low risk driving. We were trying to get in people's thoughts. So how do you feel about that? Getting them to draw world views and what's important in their world, and telling them that that's more important than, the nana's having a heart attack or whatever, somehow trying to keep them on that path. But we went so far down that way because at the time, people were looking, going, the mind is the most important thing to do the training with. And historically, ambulance services have all been about, very practical training and emergency services. So we went too far that way, in my opinion. So about 8 years ago, when I got this role, I was asked to review what we were doing. And although most of SAAS incidents were minor in nature, a lot related to manoeuvring, the rate and severity was slowly increasing. So we saw that and needed to do something about it. And my research at the time was trying to look at emergency driver training, and in Australia and overseas. And the first thing that struck me was there's very, very little information out there on this particular cohort of driving. And again, lots out there on general training, but that doesn't always compute to what we needed in emergency service. And broadly speaking, as say, I know I'm speaking to the converted here, the correct mindset is the most important thing. No matter what skills you've got, the correct mindset is important. So one of our problems was staff disengagement. And some of that was around the fact that we could go to a volunteer driver training course and essentially give them an 8-hour PowerPoint on driving, and then they never even got to play in a vehicle. And you could just, see that there was, disengagement there straight away. And the instructors certainly didn't like delivering that type of training. People think it's all going to be high speed, brake and evade type training, going around cones, not one of, what are you thinking about? So, you could see that drop in the participants as soon as you said, we're not going around the cones, we're going to ask you about how you feel. It was just, total disengagement straight away. Also, from the corporate side, there's no special license you need to drive an emergency vehicle. It's just, I could just have my Class C and that'll be it. I, as an emergency worker, could get in a vehicle and drive it under emergency conditions and be able to claim an exemption if it's reasonable. So there's no sort of legislative side that we can hang our hat on and say, this is why we've got to do training. There's a perception from, some people that say, well, they've come into the service, they've got their license. Why have they got to do loads more training? The license is the level and that is it. And again, it's very hard to argue that, yeah, okay, that's what we've got. And work pressures can make driver training obviously an easy target in the corporate world for cost savings and efficiencies and stuff like that, because it's quite an expensive thing to do, because you can't put 30 people in one classroom. You can only work on a ratio 1 to 3 in our case, in our vehicles. So we had a disengaged work group, instructors that didn't enjoy delivering the course program, a crash rate trending upwards, and pressures to keep costs down. So when looking at the bare facts, the reason why we do training is we've got a zero harm principle, same as every government department. We want to present zero harm, and obviously that comes from WHS. And if that's the key element, then why are we then still allowing our drivers to exceed speed limits, go through red lights, mount curbs, as well as putting them into a very complex driving environment, which is the cabin of an ambulance that's got lots of extra bits in it that they've got to control and work with. And how can we feel safe and comfortable that we're not exposing our staff to huge complex risk? So that was the sort of task of how we built the drive program. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Click twice. Sorry. Nervous fingers. There we go. Just got to wait. So how do we put it together and get us all on the same page? Firstly, SAAS was very supportive. The exec from SAAS said, yes, we need to do something about it. And that included rewriting policy and procedure across the organisation to support what the training was going to be. It was not just a standalone training package that we could do. It had to be service-wide, and we had to build that into a lot of things. So that was fully supported. That's the first thing we've done. Then we've got to look at some of the parameters. So, zero harm. That's not just harm to us, it's harm to the public, harm to patients. We've got to build that into our training. In the volunteer setting, we've got to look at our cohort of people that we're training. So I could go to a volunteer station and my audience that I'll be teaching, I've got, 60-year-old farmer. I've got an 18-year-old that's, just fresh into the town wanting to do something, and everybody in between. And I look at that 60-year-old farmer and he's sitting there going, "You're not going to teach me nothing, sonny." He's driven everything that ever's been made. He's worked that, for life. And it's very hard then to go, okay, you've never been exposed to corporate training, so again, we're trying to keep that engagement, because if we don't get that, we're going to be on a bad wicket to start with. And then on the opposite end of the scale, in the career setting, we've got 22, 23-year-olds coming out that have been ongoing high achievers. And they think, going back to the basics of boring driving stuff is, not for them. They just want to move forward and, go do the emergency stuff, and, and so trying to put reins on those sort of people. And you can have a mixture of that in any group that we train. And we've also got other factors that we've got to consider when we're training or building courses, is that, some medical conditions are time critical. Not a huge amount, but there's a few. And if you're one of those time critical patients, you want things to work effectively for you. And they're the standards that are adopted by government that are put onto us to run the service. So a potentially life-threatening case, we've got to be at minimum 60% of them within 8 minutes. And that's the time the call comes in to when we knock on their door. Just driving across the city on a normal day would take you longer than 8 minutes. And yet we're expected to get, from wherever we are to wherever we need to be in that 8 minutes. And that's a huge task. And that's why we've got single responders that don't sit at stations anymore. They're just floating around. If we've got, a bunch of vehicles all down the south of the city, we'll move some things up north to try and be ready to cover those sort of areas. So it's very dynamic coverage that we're trying to manage all the time now as well. In the potentially life-threatening, which is what we call our priority 2, that is, we've got to reach 90% of them within 16 minutes. Now, it's still a very tight timeline that we're working to. And so, we've got to be able to teach this element of being progressive in our driving, because we'd never meet that. So that's one big element of our driving. But certainly we don't want people to be hoons, so where's the balance? To assist us doing that, we obviously have some exemptions from law. So therefore, we've got a whole legal stuff that we need to consider when we can and can't do things. So we have to build that into our training needs. And one of the biggest things that I've mentioned before is the driver distraction. We're very conscious of the fact that we put them in a vehicle that has got additional lighting switches, siren switches that have to be operated during the drive. We've got mobile data terminals that's feeding out information about the job, hazards at the job. You might get a warning saying, "Do not attend, wait for police," or something like that. And if you're driving a single response car, you've still somehow got to pick up this information. So there's a huge amount of driver distraction going on. We also have, sat phones and normal phones and, VHF radio communication that's going on all the time. So a very distracted area, which takes up a lot of bandwidth of the driver themselves. Sorry, done it again. What I'm doing is I'm trying to scroll my words and then I scroll the whole screen. So I do apologize. Right, our current mantra is there. And that's our whole driving course in a picture. Right. And you can see how we sort of shown on that picture there is, most of it is, the brain stuff. If we are not observing and getting and giving information out, the other bits fall apart, as they would in a traffic light. The red light would drop out if you didn't have that surround around it. So we've got to have that black going on all the time surrounding everything else. That's the first part and the most important part of our practical training. Our next task is to have a clear understanding of what actually threats are to us in the driving environment. It's no good wasting, vision time looking at something that is not going to affect your drive. We've got to be looking at the exact thing that's going to cause the issue for you. So we've got to have a good recognition of that. So it was going about our, recognizing threat, really what are things we've got to be looking at. And then we move on to assessing opportunities. Now, normal road laws apply to most, but then we've got some other things that we can do. So when we're assessing opportunities, we might be looking at using a left filter lane to turn right across traffic because that's flowing and the other, straight on lanes aren't. So we've got to put that into training stuff. And then the final part is, controlling the situation. That's the physical driving. And that's where we feel that, learner drivers are sitting. They get that, they get task driven, task orientated, and that's the last part. So the rest of it is all done in our mind. So if we're coming to work fatigued, disengaged or whatever, we're not going to be able to drive like we should be. We've really got to be on the ball with the brain. And then you see, an ambo driving down the road and having a good laugh. They've got a coffee in their hand whilst they're driving, and I'm going, no, But real life's out there as well. Okay, so we also work on, if people understand what we want them to do and how we want them to do something, it's a better likelihood of them changing behaviour. It's no good us coming in saying, I've got, this and you've got to do it because I'm telling you. That won't work. So we've got to take them on a journey of that self-development of their drive and one that they see the need to do. We ask a lot of why questions all the time. They might give us a right answer, but we're asking why, trying to get that depth of knowledge from them to say, why are you corralling vehicles? Why are you sitting in this lane at the moment? Why? Because we're really, pumping that brain part of it. And one question we ask a lot, which starts that engagement process sometimes, is we ask them to think of another driving cohort that has to drive in a manner that allows somebody to be continually working in the back, in a manner that doesn't exacerbate a certain medical condition, and potentially in a way that does not delay any arrival at an area where definitive care is. You ever think about that and think, well, I don't think there is another cohort that have to do that. And some people say pilots, they do that. But even on the ground, seatbelts on, and if it's going to get bumpy, your seatbelt goes back on and nobody can get their tea or coffee, so even pilots don't have to worry too much about people being unrestrained or moving around in the back when things are going on. So we haven't come up with another cohort that have to drive, potentially like we do at the moment. So with that thought, and getting those thoughts into them, it starts engaging them, starts getting them to start thinking what we're doing. Now, my favourite little question, who's got right away? I won't ask anyone to answer, just in case. Right, but I can guarantee there's some of you that'll be thinking, well, car 3, it's already on the roundabout. The thing was, my question was totally wrong. There is no such thing as right of way on the road. There's only the obligation to give way. So when you start putting things like this through the course, they start challenging themselves as to what they thought they knew was the right thing to do. Even an ambulance with lights and sirens on does not have right of way. There are rules that say other cars must give way to the ambulance, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to. It doesn't give us right of way. And again, that's all mindset stuff. We've got to, push that throughout. And we have, lots of things like that throughout the course, just to get them thinking about some of those things that they've brought in. They've always thought that the law is the law and that's it. And then they start bringing in bad habits. So our course is broken down now. We can break it down in small chunks for delivery of volunteers and stuff like that. But what I'm going to sort of discuss here is how we deliver it in a career station. So we teach for 10 hours a day. So our normal road shift is 12 hours. So teaching day, 10 hours is quite nice for them. We work at a maximum ratio of 1 to 3. And we do that obviously because of the seating available in the ambulance. And every driver rotates through the seat about every 30 minutes during a practical drive. And the persons in the back can still ask questions or involved in discussion as well, whilst we're in motion. And by being a bit repetitive, that gives the participant really time to sort of absorb the theory and the techniques whilst they're driving. And then when they're in the back, when the person up the front gets it right, they can feel the difference in that braking style or that lane positioning or whatever it is. So it's, it's a good day. They get to do it, they get to feel the results of it, and they get questions about it. And the other thing is, like, if we ask a driver, hey, what's this rule, what's this, whatever, and they can't get it, then they've got 2 peers in the back, which they can then sort of phone a friend and find out and discuss. So it makes it quite a safe learning environment for them. And we find that the take up of that then becomes quite good, because they're not feeling like they're being put out on a limb and they just got to do everything themselves. They're getting experience of others, they're hearing other questions, they're hearing other answers, and it really starts building them up in the cars. And the current course covers a lot of basics. We do that so we have a very good foundation. The emergency driving part of it is not a special emergency driving course. It's the basic course done very, very well. There's not special techniques that you have to use for emergency driving. It's doing all the right things very well first time round. And as can be seen on the side, you've got 8 days for the course, of which 6 days of that is definitely practical driving. So there's a lot of time behind the wheel for them. Say a lot. Now that equates to around about 12 to 14 hours per person behind the wheel during a course. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of all the topics that we do, but I'll just give you a generalization, because otherwise the whole course will take you forever to go through. So, the mindset stuff, this is obviously our key thing. And then we challenge the thoughts and actions that occur during training. We highlight, somebody's subjective thinking, because, they're making assumptions, they're stereotyping other drivers or cohorts of drivers, and that leads obviously then to problems. So we don't want any of that stuff creeping in. So we really push this. Some of the mental aspects, to producing a safe emergency driving: attitude and behaviour. If we've got a poor attitude from a driver, we're never going to get anywhere. So, we've got some very strict rules on code of conduct and all those sort of things. But at the end of the day, if you've still got somebody with poor attitude, they could know all the rules and regulations and spout them off. But if they just got that bad attitude, that's a poor start to being a good driver. Subjectivity and objectivity. We want all our drivings to be objective. We want them to know fact. Right, it's a way that we take the fiction away from the fact and some of those bad habits that are creeped in, because this is this is what they do it for. This is the reason, and we go, actually, that's flawed thinking. We base it on, if you're driving 4.2 tons of metal down the road at this speed, it's going to take you this long to stop. Therefore, you need that space in front of you, and anything that's about to enter that space has got to be seen as a threat, and therefore you've got to do something about it. Policy, procedure, law, and WHS. We always put that up on the board and say, right, put them in the right order. Now, for you guys driving home this afternoon, whatever, most of you will be probably thinking the law as you drive down the road is the most important thing, which it probably is. But when we're in an organisation such as SAAS, when we have exemptions and policy and procedure, the law is not necessarily the top thing. We've got to write our policy and procedure to tell people how to do things safely, not to do anything illegal. So we then build that into our training as well. And a good example of that is seatbelts. So we're exempt from wearing a seatbelt in the back of an emergency vehicle. It's great. Nobody wears a seatbelt in the back. Wrong. The policy says you will wear a seatbelt at all times in the rear of the vehicle, unless carrying out life-saving measures. The law is there so we can stand in the back and do CPR or, put compression on a severe bleed or something like that. We can't be restrained to do that, but it doesn't mean carte blanche, you can just do what you like. So again, we build a lot of policy and procedure stuff into our training, and it's very dry topic, but it's got to be built into the current training that we're doing. Things like risk homeostasis. You start driving emergencies for a while and get used to going the wrong side of the road or through a red light and everything. It becomes the norm. When they first do it, they're very tentative and they're being coached through by an instructor, and very quickly it becomes the normal. They do, 6 or 7 emergency drives every day they're at work. It becomes the norm. And what we have to do is try and highlight that and say, it is still as risky today as it was the first time you've done it, and yet you feel very comfortable about doing it currently. So again, it's mindset that we really have to look at throughout the whole course, as I say, mind after mind. Then the main course has really got 4 parts, a lot of words on the screen. But basically, the first thing is the mantra and its principles. Our little traffic light, our mantra, that's our whole course. And that really covers the scanning and looking down the road. What's the difference between hazard and threat, crash avoidance space, getting evidence, and options to minimize those threats. So that's the key that's going on all the time. Right? Then maneuvering is our highest crash rate. It's going backwards, at 5k an hour and making contact with something that they shouldn't do. So we spend a lot of time on maneuvering the ambulances. Then we have routine driving, where we do all the basic principles, and then we move that into emergency driving, where we add one or two extra techniques to it. So does our training work? Well, it's very hard for us to tell you. We can tell you that the big hits have reduced a lot over the last few years. But we brought in different training, we brought in different policy and procedure. There's different workloads, there's more vehicles, there's more people. So it's very hard to actually extrapolate the right data to say yes, it's having an effect or not. Anecdotally, we know that we're reducing big hits, reducing any injuries, and we'll take that as workloads going up very quickly, but our crash rate is not matching that. So we think we're on the right path. And we never say our course is going to stop you ever having a crash, but if involved in a crash, it should reduce the severity of it, because you should be a little bit ahead of general other drivers. Still working on low speed maneuvering. That's over 40% of incidents are people just getting it wrong in a car park or something. So whilst emergency driving during the year 2021-22, we had 12 vehicle crashes that involved a member of the public's vehicle. Now, whilst that number is too high, and generally that's intersection hits, what we call the third lane, lane 1 clear, lane 2 clear, lane 3 looks empty. You get across, car comes through because they're going 60 because they've got a green light and can't work out why everyone else has stopped. We've reduced that type of crash, but we had 12 in 2021-22, and with 12,995 emergency dispatches that year, that equates to one crash every 12,000 or just under 13,000 responses, which is 0.09% of workload. So, could be better, but it's not every other car that's going out there, that's for sure. All right. So a little bit on CADA. So where to for our driver training. So in early 21, my counterparts from Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, we got together and we formed the collaboration of Ambulance Driver Development Australasia. We're really there. We were able to represent ourselves at ACRS in November last year, start putting our name out there as a cohort of people that we're all trying to do the right thing. And as a group, what we do, we're aiming to share sort of initiative solutions across ambulance services in Australia. We want to develop strategies for driver training delivery in the context of re-accreditation, remedial education, and continual professional development. A little bit more about that. And consistency. We're all driving very, very similar vehicles around the country, and yet none of our driver training programs talk to each other at the moment. We're all doing slightly different, but when you look at it, there's many, many elements that we're doing the same. So we're starting to bring that together. The CAA, the Council of Ambulance Authorities, is the board where all the CEOs go to and sort of have all the ambulances, and that's we've now got a voice into that. So if they're making decisions on their fleet or their education sectors of that, we've got a voice in there now that say, hey, think about this, think about that, because fleet could be going on saying, right, we're going to go all electric next year. No, they're not worried about how it's going to be trained or anything along those lines. That's our job. But now we've got that link, we can start planning things a lot earlier. Identifying issues for them, from our end of the world. Just to go back and discuss the professional practice a bit. As registered paramedics, we have to have re-accreditation every year, and that is, which is great for our clinical, but it's all clinical, and yet 50% of our job is driving. So one of our aims is to really try and push that a little bit and make sure that driving gets on that agenda of how do we do re-accreditation? How do we make sure people are staying at the higher level that they should be when they finish their training? And the other thing that's come through from CADA, the Victorian counterpart, one of them, they've got very close contacts with somebody at Monash University. And we've now got a PhD candidate that is doing their PhD on emergency driver training and driver distraction. Now, how do we put somebody in that vehicle using the extra stuff and not crash every time they go through a red light? You know, because most of our crashes is all slow speed maneuvering, not under emergency stuff. It's all routine. So it's good that now we've got somebody officially looking at that sort of stuff, and we'll see what the data is that comes out from that. Quite exciting. And the next thing is something that SAAS is doing, and we're taking a huge leap with this one, is we've taken ownership of 2 full motion simulators. And although, you can see it's just a frame thing, once you've got the goggles on, you are sitting inside a Mercedes ambulance. All the switches are there, everything is turned around, you can see the back of the ambulance and stuff like that. So we're starting to build on, using simulators. It's going to be absolutely ideal to take somebody who's in a remote country station and put them into, Jeps Cross at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and see what their reaction is, or give them the busier stations, move things around. So this is certainly a new step for us. We should take delivery of the first one in 4 or 5 weeks, and then we've got to work out how to use it. So if there's any of you, or you've got contacts with people that use simulators for training, I'd love you to reach out for us, because it's not something we've done. We don't even know how really to run a training session in a simulator yet. So any help in that front would be muchly appreciated. All right, so thank you very much. Thank you to SA chapter for inviting me to speak today. Thank you all so much for your time. Be happy to take some questions, as long as they're not too curly or hard. Thank you. Gentleman at the back there?
Yeah, I'm wondering, the ambulance, they have locked
Yes, they do. So the current version, which is the VS30, we've got around about 50% of them in our fleet now. They've really been a big upgrade to a modern vehicle from the old style. They used to have a lot of issues with the rear metal steps on the old ones having sensors in, and also trying to put sensors up higher as well. And they cancel each other out and cause a lot of issues. So the new ones have got good sensors. The only trouble is, every time we drift across a lane, it warns you, it gives you a beep, gives you a vibration. It beeps for this, it beeps for that, and beeps for. And now, when you're driving for 6 hours a day, you tune it out, and you've got a reverse beeper going beep beep beep. Then meanwhile, their partners in the back saying, "We there, we're going," and all the other things that are going on. They're tuning out some of those safety things, and that's why I think we still have issues. The new ones have got 360 view camera. So before you move off, if you just look at the camera, you haven't got to be in reverse gear. You can look down the sides of the vehicle. We still get vehicles driving off from a car park, and they hit that one bollard that's, because they didn't park the car there, they just jumped in and turned, and there's a bollard sitting right down there. Whereas if they looked at the camera, they would see that. The trouble is, I can't change like a process. We almost need like a checklist now before we take on and go, is this set? Is that done? Is that done? Is that done? But I can't do that until we've got all of them in the fleet, because if I change a policy, somebody in Port Augusta is going, what the hell are you talking about? Our ambulance doesn't even do that. So yes, they do have a lot of sensors on. The trouble is, now people are tuning it out, which I think is general across a lot of things, that they get so used to it. Yep.
What are the techniques you're adopting to overcome fatigue?
So yeah, fatigue is a huge thing in the ambulance service. And we have some very strict procedures around that, in the fact that, we have to score. So if you're a volunteer, for example, going on shift, you have to have a fatigue score of X before you come onto the shift, because volunteers are at work all day and then they offer to do a night shift, or they've been working all week, they come and do the weekend, things like that. So we get fatigue scoring, and we've got what we call an AFSET tool and something else tool. And also, if we're doing longer journeys, particularly like bariatric vehicles, stuff might have to go longer way to get a patient. Those jobs are risk assessed by what we call the state duty manager before they go, and say, yep, we're going to have to put an extra person in that vehicle, because that's going to be too much for one person driving up there and driving back, because their partner's going to be in the back, or you've got to keep swapping around, and that interrupts clinical care. So yeah, we've got some standalone procedures for fatigue. and self-reporting as well. So if you notice fatigue yourself, or if you're not, we'll do things like, instead of you driving home after a night shift, we'll give you a taxi to go home in, and tools like that to make sure that our staff is as safe as we can be. We can also, in extreme case, halfway through a shift, go, I'm out, I've had too much. This state duty manager can say, okay, go off the road for a couple of hours, go get some sleep, have a sleep, then get up, have a coffee, whatever, come back in 2 hours time. Obviously that is looked at. If we had the same person doing that every night shift, we'd soon pick up patterns around, but we've got those sort of functions available to us. Used to be that passive shifts, after midnight was a passive shift, but now you come in for a 12-hour night shift and you are on the go from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 8 till 8, whatever your shift is. There's just no downtime at all now, which in some ways is better than having 20 minutes in a chair and then going out on another job again and keep doing that all night long. That's really hard.
Like in DIT, we got a zero alcohol policy. So in driving, but normally it's allowed like 0.05, so what is in? So
zero. So we've got to be zero alcohol and drugs all the time. We're engaged in SAAS driving. So yeah.
Just curious, was it you had 8 minutes to get to the
priority ones? Yep.
How much of that is actually driving, and how much is like sucked up by the kind of, because that was from when you get the... Okay,
so when the call comes into the call center, it's picked up by somebody who says, hello, ambulance. Person goes, oh my God, that collapsed. Where are you? That's one of the first questions that gets asked. Where are you? And they say 15 Smith Street, Glenelg. And so at that moment, that job is put over to a dispatcher, and they know they've got a job. It's a priority 1 or 2, and it's in 15 Smith Street, Glenelg. Who have I got the closest? They look at the AVL. The AVL automatically says this vehicle is available on the closest, but there's a list of about 10 different vehicles. They might pick another one for another particular reason. That is then transmitted to the ambulance straight away. So within 60 seconds of the call coming in, it's generally dispatched.
Yeah.
And that's why the crews are going to be on their way, making sure that they've, getting more information. And then we find out it's just somebody that's got a bit too upset, it's not as bad as we thought it was, and say, okay, we can downgrade you. Or alternatively, oh, it sounds worse, let's send more. But yeah, so that 8 minutes is really about 60 seconds we should be underway. Yeah. Yes, gentleman at that.
One once you know with location, how is their route to the incident plotted? Is it optimized or is it up to their own?
No, so local knowledge is, can be a good thing. Also, in a driving point of view, it can be a bad thing, because you go, well, I always go down this road and I always do this, and their mindset is not there. But generally, the MDT is associated with a GPS unit. It uses the government data that says, hey, you need to go this way, and it's always done on the shortest possible route. So, but if an AMBO knows that, well, the shortest route is there, but this is a quick road, I'll take the quick road, they can do that. But yeah, it's auto-populated through the system. So you get a warning coming in the vehicle, makes a noise, you accept, acknowledge, and it populates your GPS, and you follow the purple line. This is essentially what they do.
Opportunities for like a green wave solution where...
Yes, we do. Yeah. So green light corridors, we can use them. We have access to, a traffic management center. We can say, hey, I need to go from here to here. They can manually do a route for us as well if need be. The trouble is, with our call work volume, if we were to use that, we would gridlock the place, because every time they change the sequence of the lights, there's a knock-on effect for 14, 15 minutes before it returns to normal. So you imagine, at this moment in time, there's probably, 4 or 5 ambulances in the city area going to the RAR, coming from the RAR, doing something that are on emergency dispatches. If every one of them wanted a green light corridor, we'd end up gridlocking the city very well. For people like the fireys and everything, they use a green light corridor all the time. They've got much bigger appliance, takes more to get it going and stopping it and all those sort of things. But they're not doing much call volume, as much as they're busy, but they're not quite like us. So we can use it. Our staff in MedStar, if they're going to like the Lower McEwen from the MedStar base or a road transfer, or they're doing a paediatric retrieval or something on a Friday night, they might ring up and say, can I have route 123? And that will give them that green light corridor all the way to Lower McEwen. So we didn't used to use them a lot because they were originally set up for fire trucks, and maximum speed was like 68k an hour. You had to stay at 68k an hour to go through and run it. And of course, we were traveling a little bit quicker than that and overrunning the lights, So that was the initial thing, but now they can do a manual one for us, but we just don't use it unless it's really, really important that we get that perfect run. Yeah.
Just around the whole road rules aspect, I suppose, because even just general Class C drivers, probably expected to know more than they actually can. And obviously, you explained really well about that roundabout sort of paradigm. With the ambulance officers having to have all of the policy procedure knowledge and all the clinical things, and then knowing sort of road rules as well, I suppose, what's the expectation around that? Understanding there are exemptions for certain things, but maybe more from policy procedure style.
I think it's very important that we highlight our policies and procedures, because they've already been written to say, this is the safe way of doing things, this is how we want to do it safely, and we're not going to get you to do anything illegal. So, for example, going through a red traffic light, it says they must slow down to less than 20k an hour to cross into the intersection, and they can only then start speeding up when the intersection is all clear and static. So, with that, knowing that part, we also know that they're going to comply with the rule, because it's going to be reasonable should they want the exemption for that. We pushed them quite hard during the initial training to know Rule 306, exemptions from other drivers for 78, 79, i.e. can they go through red lights? Under the Road Traffic Act, we've got defences, so we don't have an exemption, but we have a defence should we be charged with X, Y, Z, but it's only if things are reasonable. So our policies basically says what's reasonable. So if I want a defence, if I go to court, if I go through, let's say I go through a red light and make contact with a car, right? The police will come along and say, naughty boy, Andrew, you shouldn't be doing that. We're going to charge you with driving undue care. We're going to charge the other car with driving undue care and failing to give way to an emergency vehicle. Police will do that knowing that I can go to court because I have a defence. I'm an emergency worker. It was reasonable to do what I was doing because I was going to an emergency case. And then the last thing is, was I following a direction of my employing authority? And this is where, okay, I went through the intersection at 23k an hour. No defence available to me. I went through the intersection at 19k an hour. Yes, defence available. So when you highlight that sort of stuff, people really see the value of making sure they know what the policies, procedures are, and some of the extra laws.
Does that take do you have drivers going to court all the time, or does that have much of a burden?
No, it's not. We have a very good relationship with the police. We generate over 1,200 expiation notices a month. Most of them are dealt with through sort of normal means, but we still have, if police ask, we've still got to be able to prove every single one of those 1,200 notices. Now, generally, we look at certain cohorts and go, explain that one to me, explain this one to me, and so we keep the workload down a bit, but generally those notices are done and we have to explain that we're good.
Yeah, go ahead. I might just check whether there's online questions.
Yeah.
But you guys keep going.
How do you allocate the staff? Like, say that someone's very good at clinical for space, but then they get to the driver training and they're actually a driver. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not everyone's a good driver.
That's right.
Is there a way of prioritising, or do you have?
No. Essentially, it's everyone has to do both jobs, because generally, if you look at a two-person crew, if I was to jump in the passenger seat, I'm the attendant, and we would drive to the scene. I would treat said patient with support from my partner, and then I would get into the back with that patient and go to hospital. And then the next job, we swap roles. So everyone's got to be able to do every job. The other thing is, if you're backing up another crew, you just might be picked to go, right, can you do CPR? Can you do this? Can you do, so everyone's got to be able to do everything. So if you've got somebody that is not good on the driving front, quite often the team that they work with goes, "Bert's terrible," you know, that will generate some remedial work or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Anything else at all?
I couldn't see any online.
All right, cool. Oh, is there? Sorry.
Yeah. I need to order that because this and stuff, like what are the criteria when you say one person in the car is the end?
It's really on the dispatch criteria. We've got lots and lots of determinants. So say, for example, somebody calls up, they're panicking because their mum's collapsed and she's a diabetic. Okay. That job most likely will not need to go to hospital. We need to go there, give some treatment and do that. So we could send a single responder to that and save a patient carrying crew for another job. So we have lots of determinants that say, okay, this needs this type of care. You know, a cardiac arrest, we want a minimum of an ambulance that can carry a patient. That's 2 crew. We want at least a person to sort of manage the scene, because there's lots of people to deal with and lots of things to do. And we need the highest clinical level that we've got, which may be an intensive care paramedic in a solo car, or they might be part of a general crew. So you'd get, you know, at least 3 vehicles going to a cardiac arrest. So it's really on the determinants of what's reported to us, you know, and sometimes we send everything and find out that the case was nowhere near what it actually was. But if we don't do that, then obviously we leave you know, problem areas for people that actually do need that sort of help. Jamie, did you see you had one? Or?
Yeah. I was just going to put my researcher hat on, and you've obviously got a whole bunch of data on various things.
Yeah.
But you've also said there's lots of stuff you don't have.
Good data to
evidence about. I'm just wondering, does SAAS have a research team or a data analysis?
Yes, we have the business intelligence unit, who they're looking at, you know, data all the time. But again, huge amount focus on clinical and response times and appropriate responses, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, a lot of stuff. We can ask them to do things, but you know, from driving, you know, it's just driving would be a little bit down on the list of things to do. But we do have some people in work that deal with data stuff, and that's where a lot of it's for the government reports that we have to do and things like that. Oh, another one, yep.
Any component of driving or
To be honest, we're not 100% sure yet as to how, you know, how we're going to use that. The initial intent is to in our peri-urban space where we've got volunteer stations, and let's say you only have to go sort of Strathalbyn and you've got a volunteer station there. So their training is done in a quieter area. We haven't driven them through multi-lane intersections because all the training took place down there and there's no roundabouts, no traffic lights or whatever. So part of that training, we could then put them into that simulated space and go, here's a busy intersection to drive through. You know, are you seeing this? Did you see that person? Did you see that happen? You know, so that's where we think it's going to fit. It's not going to take away from all practical driver training. It may take away a small section. You know, like the cone course, we spend a lot of time doing maneuvering, practical maneuvering. Could we put them in the simulator to get them used to those blind spots and areas and where they've got to move their head and see the cones and everything for, you know, 10 minutes before they go to a cone course, which then will speed that up. Again, this is something where we don't really know where it's going to fit yet. But that cohort of peri-urban stations that come into the metro a lot, and we put a restriction on them because we haven't done the training in a busy environment. So they have a speed restriction placed on them. As we all have a speed restriction, but theirs is even tighter because we haven't been able to assess them going through a multi-lane intersection against the red light. So we're hoping the simulator will start bridging some of those gaps.
The Road Transport Association have a simulator that they utilise for training drivers down the southeastern freeway.
All right. Might be the route to reach out to. Yeah. And that's where we think with the simulators, there'll be some key things that it really works well for. So yeah, that's what we're looking at doing. But yeah, I only saw it a week ago, you know, so it's all fairly new for us. Yes, well, we did have, we had 2 fully marked up motorbikes, and we used them for a space of about 2.5, 3 years. They were only ever project status, and so when that funding went away, they went away. We had some very good data from those to say that, you know, basically 50% of the jobs that the bikes went to, we could leave at home or alternate care, so we didn't need a patient carrying vehicle. Response times were not that much quicker in the way it was set up. But, you know, as one of those motorcyclists, you know, it was, I thought it was a great avenue to go down. We know other services use them regularly. But yeah, it was just seen as a bit of a high risk that SAAS didn't want to take, and there was no extra funding for that. And so we'd have to take from the sprint training for the single responders type thing, or, you know, there wasn't the appetite for that at the time. But it was good. The police course in Victoria, 3 weeks with a police officer sitting behind you telling you go quicker. That's a very strange environment to be in. Gentlemen there.
I'm not really, but I know that I think it's 50% of the ambulance services volunteer.
Yeah, so we've got a very large cohort of volunteers, the same as all ambulance services around Australia. Yep, so they do, there's different levels you can do. We start off with ambulance assist, where really they're just getting in and they can do driving, they can do all the manual task stuff, they can move the stretcher around and supply equipment, but they don't have an authority to practice on their own. Then we have ambulance responder, who's then got a few extra skills. Then we have an ambulance officer who's would have a Cert 4 in pre-hospital emergency care. Don't quote me on that, but it's they had a certificate to do, which we all train, you know, in-house, and so they're autonomous. They can defib, they can give certain drugs, you know, and they can work on their own or work with other people. And then you move up to, you know, paramedics that are doing Bachelor of Health Science degree over 3 years, then an 18-month internship, then they get given their tick to do. So it's just varying clinical levels, but there's a lot of volunteers that are doing a lot of very active work, and they get called to the big bad gnarly car crash as much as they do get called to Mabel's, you know, or split finger or something, the same as we do in the city. Yeah. Right.
Well, it is about to hit 2 o'clock, so
All right.
I will please join me in thanking.
Thank you very much.
Probably the most questions we've ever had at a session for a while. Have a drink. Yeah, so thanks for coming, everyone. As I said at the beginning, please keep your eye out for future sessions and hopefully some field trips. But enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll see you next time. Cheers.